A day in the life of an Old West trail cook, known affectionately as Cookie. Welcome to Keeping the Old West Alive, where we step back in time to experience authentic life in the American West. I'm glad you've joined us today as we explore one of the most underappreciated heroes of the cattle drive era, the trail cook, or Cookie, as he was known on the dusty trails. While cowboys get all the glory in Western tales, it was Cookie who kept them alive, strong, and surprisingly well-fed during those grueling months on the trail. Without the trail cook, the great cattle drives that helped build the American West would have been impossible. So what was life really like for these culinary pioneers? Let's saddle up and discover what a day in the life of a trail cook was really like in the 1870s. The position of trail cook emerged with the great cattle drives following the Civil War. As Texas ranchers drove their herds north to railheads in Kansas, they needed someone to keep their cowboys fed and functioning through months of grueling work. The Chuckwagon itself was invented by Texas rancher Charles Goodnight in 1866, when he modified an Army surplus wagon to create a mobile kitchen. The term chuck was slang for food, and the Chuckwagon quickly became the heart and soul of any cattle drive. By the 1870s, the Chuckwagon had been refined into an ingenious mobile kitchen, complete with a chuck box at the rear with drawers and shelves for food and tools, a hinged lid that folded down to create a work surface, and a boot underneath to store Dutch ovens and cooking utensils. The cook was typically older than the cowboys, often someone who could no longer handle the physical demands of being a full-time cowboy, but knew the trail and commanded respect. Despite being paid more than the average cowboy, about $45 per month compared to a cowboy's $30, the position demanded incredible endurance and skill. A trail cook's day began long before anyone else stirred in camp. Pause. Rising around 3 a.m., Cookie's first task was to restart the previous night's fire and get coffee brewing. The smell of that coffee was often the first sense that greeted cowboys as they were awakened for their dawn shift. By 4 a.m., Cookie would be mixing sourdough for the day's bread. Every experienced cook maintained a sourdough starter, a fermented mixture carried in a special container that was guarded almost as carefully as the trail boss guarded the money box. This starter was Cookie's secret weapon for making bread without access to fresh yeast. Breakfast typically consisted of sourdough biscuits, bacon or salt pork, beans, and strong black coffee. Cookie would serve the morning meal by 5 a.m., giving the cowboys fuel before they gathered the herd for the day's drive. Once breakfast was over, Cookie had to quickly clean up, pack the entire Chuckwagon, and move ahead of the herd to set up the midday meal site. This was crucial timing. He needed enough of a head start to have food ready when the cattle drive stopped, but couldn't go so far ahead that he risked being isolated if danger threatened. While driving the wagon to the next site, Cookie would keep an eye out for fuel for his fires. Wood was scarce on the plains, so he'd collect buffalo chips, dried bison dung dash, which burned hot and relatively clean. He'd also gather any edible plants he recognized to supplement the cowboy's diet. By mid-morning, Cookie would select a suitable noon site near water, but with good drainage and protection from the elements. He'd immediately get fires going for the midday meal, which was often a simple affair of leftovers from breakfast, perhaps supplemented with fresh biscuits. After the noon meal and another quick cleanup, Cookie would head out again, this time to establish the evening campsite. The afternoon drive to the night camp was when Cookie could take stock of his supplies, plan upcoming meals, and perhaps work on repairing equipment. Arriving at the evening site by 4 p.m., Cookie would establish his domain. The Chuckwagon was always positioned with its rear facing away from the prevailing wind to keep dust out of the food. It also served as the boundary of the wagon yard, an invisible line that cowboys were not to cross without permission. This was Cookie's kitchen, and he ruled it absolutely. The evening meal was the most substantial of the day. Cookie would prepare a hearty stew or beans, more biscuits, perhaps corn dodgers, and on good days, a fruit cobbler made from dried apples or peaches. Coffee was always brewing, and Cookie might even serve up a special treat made with molasses or brown sugar if supplies allowed. After dinner, while cowboys took shifts watching the herd, Cookie would clean up, prepare his sourdough starter for the next day, and perhaps mend clothing or equipment by firelight. He was typically the last to bed and the first to rise, catching perhaps 4 hours of sleep on a good night. The trail cook faced unique dangers beyond those of the average cowboy. Burns were common hazards, as were injuries from handling heavy Dutch ovens and equipment. Cookie cooked in all weather conditions, blistering heat, pouring rain, and even snow in the northern territories. Perhaps the greatest challenge was provisioning. A typical cattle drive with 12 cowboys required about 3,000 pounds of supplies to start, including 400 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of sugar, 100 pounds of beans, 75 pounds of coffee, and substantial amounts of salt, dried fruit, and bacon. When supplies ran low, Cookie had to improvise with what was available. This might mean trading with settlements they passed, hunting fresh game, or stretching ingredients in creative ways. Water was another constant concern. Cookie needed clean water for cooking and coffee, but water sources could be contaminated, dried up, or simply non-existent along parts of the trail. Many cooks became experts at filtering muddy water through cloths and boiling it to make it usable. And unlike the cowboys who could ride ahead if danger threatened, Cookie was bound to his wagon, making him vulnerable during river crossings, storms, or encounters with hostile parties. Lesser-known facts. What many don't realize is that the trail cook was often the unofficial doctor, dentist, banker, and news source for the outfit. Cookie typically kept a small medicine chest with remedies for common ailments. Many cooks were also skilled at pulling teeth and basic wound care. The Chuckwagon was considered neutral territory during disputes. Cowboys were expected to leave their arguments behind when they came to meals, making the cook an informal peacekeeper. One trail cook was known to have saved an entire cattle drive when he used his medical knowledge to treat an outbreak of fever that had incapacitated half the cowboys. Using herbs he'd gathered along the trail, he created poultices and teas that helped the men recover enough to complete their journey. Hollywood often portrays trail cooks as grumpy old men, and while many were indeed known for their colorful language and strict rules, they were also often the most educated person in the outfit. Many were well-read and served as letter writers for illiterate cowboys, connecting them to distant families. The trail cook may not have roped steers or fought rustlers, but without his skills and dedication, the great cattle drives that helped build the American West would have been impossible. In many ways, Cookie was the unsung hero of westward expansion, keeping the workforce fed, healthy, and moving forward through incredible hardships. Next time, we'll dig deep into more occupations of the Old West. Until then, this is P.W. Moore, and around here, we're keeping the Old West alive and bringing you back in history one story at a time. If you enjoyed this glimpse in the exciting life of a cattle drive cookie, hit subscribe and give us a thumbs up today. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, leave a comment with something you'd like to see us cover.